Welcome. Today we are talking about building regulations, and I'm delighted to be joined by John Albon. I'm not going to do John's intro today. John's going to do his own. So, John, please, for everybody watching, can you introduce yourself?
Hello, Peter. Yeah, I'm John Albon. I'm the BBA's Chief Scientific Officer. I've been working for the BBA now for over 30 years, worked in pretty much all of the operational departments, and my role at the moment is to ensure the technical integrity of everything that the BBA does as an organisation.
Perfect. So, nobody better in the organisation than to answer these following questions. That's why I'm delighted to be joined by yourself. So, first and foremost, as we're talking about building regulations, what are the building regulations?
Well, they're statutory instruments that set out the minimum technical standards for the design and construction of a building so as to ensure the safety and well-being of the occupants, passers-by and the emergency services. In the UK, we have 4 separate sets of building regulations, one each for England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and they are all subtly different, but they operate to the same basic principle, whereby they divide up the overall requirement into individual categories such as fire, structural performance and thermal performance of the building. They apply to all new buildings and also to a material change of use. So as, for example, if you're going to convert an office into residential accommodation, and also to some types of renovations.
Okay, excellent. So that kind of pans out what they actually are, but how do they work?
Well, the statutory regulations set out a function that the building must deliver. For example, they'll control the maximum permissible rate that a fire can spread across the outside of the wall of a building. Now, what they don't do, they don't define how you control that, and they don't set a requirement for how rapidly that fire can spread. Those details are contained in a separate set of documents, and again, there are individual sets for each of the 4 countries of the United Kingdom that give guidance on how to satisfy the basic requirements. They're all slightly different and they've all got different titles, but for example, in England and Wales, they're called the approved documents. Now, these guidance documents set out ways in which, if you follow a certain scenario, you will satisfy the requirements of the regulations. So for that example of spread of fire across the external wall of a building, the guidance documents will tell you the minimum performance, so the reaction to fire characteristics for a material to be used in that wall on the basis of the height of the building and the proximity to a boundary, so how close you can be to a neighbouring building for that performance of a material. These are acceptable solutions. If you do what it says in the guidance documents, you will satisfy the requirements of the regulations. But it's not mandatory to do so. Lots of people think it is, but in fact it isn't. It's perfectly acceptable to adopt alternative solutions to satisfy the requirements of the regulations. But if you do that, it's then the builder's responsibility to satisfy building control that their solution is acceptable for that building. It's much simpler and more usual to follow the guidance given in, for example, the approved documents. It's also worth knowing that there are certain situations that are not covered by the guidance documents. For example, innovative materials or an innovative use of a material may well not be well covered by the guidance documents. They cannot cover every possible material or scenario of use. In those situations, specifiers will very often find it useful to have a BBA certificate for that particular material and use, because that can enable them to show compliance with the regulations.
Okay, so I think what we've uncovered there is what they actually are, and we went into a bit of detail in good examples of how they're utilised, what they cover and what they don't cover, and to a certain extent. But who actually uses these building regulations?
Well, it's pretty much everyone involved in the construction process. They need to be aware of these requirements. That would include architects, main contractors, specialist contractors, and just general builders. Important to recognise it's actually a criminal offence not to comply with the requirements of the building regulations. So anyone involved in construction needs to understand this.
Okay, so hugely important, these regulations, clearly. You alluded to it in a previous answer, but how do you know what the requirements actually are? What's the best way to do that?
Yeah, as I've discussed, most people will take the route of following the guidance in the approved documents. If you do follow that, then you are automatically, in most situations, going to be able to say you've satisfied the requirements of the regulations themselves. These guidance documents are freely available through the various government websites.
Okay, that's cool. So I guess it's a case of know and understand what you need to know and understand, but it's all there readily available online as most things are.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Excellent. So we've uncovered what these regulations are and how you use them and how you find out a bit more information by going online. But who enforces these?
Well, the enforcement of the regulations is the responsibility of building control. There are two options in that respect. You can go to your local authority building control office, or alternatively, there are independent organisations known as approved inspectors. They both perform the same function. It's really for the builder to decide which of the two options is best for their particular project.
Okay, that's cool. Fair enough. Let's bring this back to the BBA then. And how can the BBA help with building regulations and those people that need to utilise them?
Yeah, as I say, the usual route to compliance is to follow the guidance in the approved documents and the equivalent elsewhere in the UK. But these guidance documents are lengthy and complex documents, and it can take a long time and a lot of effort to actually come to terms with the content of these. They set out quite complex and detailed test and design specifications that you will need to follow and achieve in order to meet the requirements of the regulation. Now, BBA certificate, as you know, is a statement of a product's fit for purpose for a particular application. And as part of this, obviously, we include its requirements under the National Building Regulations. Each individual certificate will have a separate building regulations section that will list all of the relevant regulations for that particular product and use combination. And importantly, also gives all of the relevant product performance characteristics that a potential user will need to know if they are to make a decision as to whether or not that product is suitable for use in a particular application. So we give all the information the specifier or user needs to know. They need to apply that information in the context of the requirements of the approved documents. So there is a decision to be made, and it has to be made by the user on a case-by-case basis. It's important to recognise that simply having a BBA certificate in itself does not mean that that product is going to be suitable for use in every possible application. It's all clearly described within the certificate, but someone has to make a decision on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, cool. That's really good to know. So we've pretty much covered everything that I want to cover today. And I think there's quite a lot of detail that's gone into your answer, so I really appreciate that. But to add some context or meat to the building regs bones, can you give a specific example of where BBA certificates can make a difference here?
Well, I like to think having a BBA certificate can make a difference in every case, because all certificates contain this performance information I've just been talking about. Again, it's validated performance information. We don't simply take the information, we go through it and we check it's appropriate. And also through our surveillance arrangements, we make sure that those data are relevant throughout the lifetime of the certificate. We regularly go into the factory where these materials are being manufactured, and we check that they are exactly as we describe them in the certificate. So their relevance is maintained throughout the lifetime of that certificate. But if you want a specific example, all of the building regulations will contain information on thermal requirements for that building. BBA issues certificates for insulation materials. Within those certificates, we'll always give information as to the thermal conductivity of the insulation material. And again, this is a validated performance characteristic. It's not simply reproducing something that's been claimed by the manufacturer. So you can take that declared thermal conductivity, and we do, and we then carry out example U-value calculations for building elements containing that product. And we compare the values we achieve with the requirements of the guidance documents. So it's very simple for a potential user to take the certificate, look at the performance that can be achieved, and compare that to the requirements for their particular building on a case-by-case basis.
That's really cool. It's good to know. Actually, you've made something that could be complex sound quite simple. Although I wouldn't want to be the one that's taking things on via case-by-case basis. I'll leave that to our professors and people like yourself to look through that and make sure that we are at the BBA doing the best we possibly can for the whole construction industry. So, John, thank you so much for joining me today. Really, really appreciate your time and your knowledge as ever. And from everybody that's going to watch this video, I'm pretty sure they will get all the information they need on building regulations and how the BBA can help them within that area. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Peter.